Having looked at Emil Durkheim, who is the founder of Functionalism, today we're going to have a bit of a broader look at Functionalism in general, explain some of the key ideas and concepts about Functionalism, what it is as a theory, and having a look at some of the other major theorists. You'll see the image to the right of the screen, and that will become apparent as to what that is soon. But just so you're aware that very often when we're talking about sociology, we talk in terms of analogy, and we may use analogies in order to explain complicated social concepts. And the reason this is the case is that by providing an analogy, it gives an easier way for us to understand a concept that might be otherwise quite complicated to explain. Some of our key words today, we've got quite a few today. We have functional prerequisites, institutions, social order, and value consensus. Now, these are all things that are important for functionalists and things that functionalists talk about. So, functional prerequisites, are the basic needs of society. So if something is described as a functional prerequisite, it means that it is required in order for society to function. Functionalists believe that most of the institutions in society are these. We will look at the body analogy in a second. I mentioned it in the previous video, but suffice to say that functionalists view basically all institutions within society as functionally important and are prerequisites for a smooth running society. Speaking of institutions, institutions are the important parts of the structure of society maintained by social norms. Examples of institutions include the media, education system, criminal justice system, the family, and religion, to name but a few. The social order is how society is constructed and maintained. Remember, as sociologists, we talk about things being socially constructed, but it's important to remember that society itself has been constructed. It's not a thing that exists inherently. It's a thing that has been created. So we need to bear that in mind when we're thinking about how society has been constructed and why it has been constructed in the way it has. And then we've got a very important functionalist concept, value consensus. Now, functionalists see value consensus as the beliefs that are commonly shared by a particular social group. So functionalists believe that in general we have a shared norms and values within society, or a value consensus. We all generally and broadly agree that we have the same goals and the same values in society. So these are some of our key terms you need to be aware of, and as you're answering your questions about functionalism, you need to be making sure that you're using these key terms wherever possible. So it's important to understand how functionalists view society before we learn much more about them. So by nature of being called functionalists, they believe that everything in society has a function, a generally positive function as well. They focus on social structures and how society remains stable and acts as beneficial to all of the members. Now, they would use something called the analogy of the body. I mentioned this briefly in the previous video, but the idea is that different social institutions, such as family, education, and religion, are like the important organs in the body of society. So functionalism examines these institutions in terms of their function, and that means the job that they do and the job they perform in order to help society run smoothly. The different social institutions meet the needs of society by performing different functions to ensure its survival. And much like the body, if you were to take one of these institutions or one of these organs out, the body is either going to get ill or die. So functionalists would believe that if any of these institutions stop working or are removed, society itself would either become ill or die. And by that we mean cease to exist. So the analogy of the body is a good way to understand the way that functionalists view all of the institutions of society. And we're going to have a look at a couple of examples. We looked at crime in the previous video and how functionalists view crime as performing positive functions. Today we're going to look at it through the lens of the family and see what functionalists think about the family and the positive functions that it performs for society. So those of you who have me in class, I will ask you to design your perfect family. But from a functionalist perspective, the nuclear family, that is male, female adults in a heterosexual, monogamous relationship with 2 kids, is the perfect family. Functionalists see the nuclear family as perfect for providing all of the things that a family should provide for society. And we will have a look at what the functions of the family are from the functionalist perspective shortly, but it's important that you understand, obviously, other families do exist. Family diversity is a topic that we'll look at, but from the functionalist perspective, the nuclear family is ideal. And they would also argue that the reason it exists and is or historically has been, the dominant family model in Europe at least, is that it is natural. So, George Murdock, who is a functionalist, states that the family has 4 functions, and he thinks that these functions function in order to keep society stable and beneficial for everyone. So we'll briefly have a look through these 4 functions: the function of reproduction, primary socialisation, emotional support and nurture, and economic provision. So functionalists, or Murdock anyway, sees the family as performing all of these functions. Now bear in mind, when he's referring to the family, he is really referring to the nuclear family, which is actually an excellent form of evaluation for all of these functions. When you start thinking about diverse family structures, they may not all meet these specific functions that Murdock identifies. The first 2 functions that Murdock identified were reproduction and primary socialisation. So, reproduction. Society needs new members to survive. This is evident, because if no one had any children, then society would end in 1 generation. And Murdock argued that the nuclear family has an important role in this through procreation and childbearing. The family reproduces the human race and thus the future workforce. So in order for society to remain stable, we need to have more workers and we need to have more people to replace the people who die, and as such the family performs this function. 2, we have primary socialisation, and socialisation is an incredibly important concept within sociology, and basically all sociologists talk about socialisation. All socialisation is a transmission of norms and values from one place to another. So the primary socialisation is how norms and values are transmitted or passed on from parents to children. So Murdock argued that the family performs this function by teaching us how to fit in and conform to rules, and it ensures that we behave according to the rules of society. Given that the family are an agent of social control, we become familiar with the culture and way of life of the society we are born into, and our norms and values are passed on to us. So the way that society expects us to behave, the fact that you smile when you're happy, you clap when someone does something good, you say please, you say thank you, all these things that we take for granted are passed on to us by our parents to us, so that in future we are able to continue reinforcing those social norms. So reproduction, primary socialisation are the first 2 functions that Murdock identified. The next 2 are slightly more complicated. We have emotional support and nurture and economic provision. So the emotional support and nurture, Murdock argues that most of us need stable relationships with and support from other people. The nuclear family provides us with emotional and psychological support and comfort, and usually the mother takes on this role. So in traditional families, or the traditional family makeup, the nuclear family, the mother takes on the role of the emotional supporter, and this is referred to as the expressive role. And 4, we have economic provision. We all need financial support. We need food, we need somewhere to live, we need, and particularly when we're young, or when we're elderly, or when we're sick. Murdock argues that the nuclear family meets these needs, and it is usually the fathers who are economic providers. This is known as the instrumental role. For example, the family provides children who are economically dependent on their parents with a home and 3 meals a day. So the second 2 functions that Murdock identified are emotional support and nurture and economic provision. However, Durkheim and Murdock aren't the only functionalists. We also have a man called Talcott Parsons, or Parsons. Parsons, similarly to Murdock, argues that the family performs a certain function for society, and he said that the family helps to prevent adults from behaving in a disruptive or dysfunctional way and encourages them to conform to social norms, especially at times of stress. Parsons argues that the family provides emotional support to its members, similar to what Murdock said. Now, the difference here is that Parsons used the analogy of a warm bath. This essentially is the idea that the family acts like a warm bath, relaxing us and relieving the stresses. The idea is that when a man comes home from a hard day at work, he could relax into his family like a warm bath, and it would take away all the stress and refresh him, ready for another day's work, ensuring that society is calm, functions well, and that people conform to social norms. Now, obviously, you may already be thinking of ways you can criticise these arguments, but especially as we go on further and look at different sociological perspectives, there will be other sociologists who very much disagree with this idea of the family. But so that you're aware, functionalists view the family as fulfilling specific functions. Murdock identified reproduction, primary socialisation, emotional support and nurture, and economic provision. And Parsons identified families as acting as a way to stop adults from behaving in a dysfunctional or disruptive way, helping them to conform to social norms. And this theory of Parsons is referred to as the warm bath theory. So in general, I hope you can see that functionalists, as mentioned, generally see things in a very positive light. All of the institutions, so we've looked at crime, and we've looked at the family, we haven't looked at education yet, or religion, but rest assured, functionalists view those institutions as helping people to conform to social norms and reinforcing that value consensus. So functionalists generally see most of the institutions and parts of society as working well and smoothly in order to help maintain social cohesion and social stability. Functionalism is obviously one of the major theories you are expected to understand alongside Marxism and feminism, which we'll come to later. And hopefully that's given you a brief introduction and a decent understanding of the basics of functionalism. Obviously, we will go into it in further detail as we continue.